All right, looks like I'm finally online. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live stream. I'm Dr. Derek J. Wright, and today I'm going to be talking about the fit of different mouthpieces in French horns. Now, I know that this may be the most boring topic I've ever tried to do, but I've just noticed that it keeps coming up over and over again when customers contact us about mouthpieces. There are a lot of misconceptions about mouthpiece fit out there, and I wanted to just take some time to try to arrange things. But before we get started, I have tested all of my audio equipment this time before starting. So there should be no issues, but if there is, please let me know in chat. Also, if you have any questions about anything French horn related or really brass instrument related, go ahead and leave a message in chat. I love interacting with chat and I love talking with people during these live streams. It's the reason why I do these talks as live streams instead of as just edited videos. It's because I like to talk with you guys. And also, as you can see, I've taken some time to redecorate my studio, try to improve my video background. So leave some comments and let me know how you like this new setup, or if I need to continue to make changes. Yeah. Okay, but on to mouthpiece fit. So there are two different types of mouthpiece fits. There are European shake mouthpieces and there are American shake mouthpieces. But that's only the beginning of the story. The difference in taper between Morse and European is just that. It is a difference in taper. Morse mouthpieces have a taper that is that allows the mouthpiece to go a little farther down into the shank, while the European taper is a little shallower. However, you have to use the type of mouthpiece that fits in your horn, with a few exceptions that we are going to get to. If your horn was made to take a Morse mouthpiece, you have to use a Morse mouthpiece. And if your horn was built to take a European mouthpiece, you have to use a European mouthpiece. Again, the two are not interchangeable. Sometimes I know people will ask, well, it looks like my Morse mouthpiece is going down too far. So what I mean by going down too far is they take the horn and they put in their Morse mouthpiece and they feel like, oh, well, that's going in farther than what I'm used to. I might need a European shank mouthpiece to back it out. That's not the way you tell whether you need a Morse or a European shank mouthpiece. Because if you have a Morse taper, so the receiver on this horn right now is Morse. And this is a European taper mouthpiece. If I put the European taper mouthpiece inside of the Morse receiver, it rocks. It doesn't hold tight. And while that little rock, I can any mouthpiece, if I screw it in hard enough, it's not going to rock anymore. But the problem is, number one, the mouthpiece might shift while you're playing, which is never fun. But more importantly, the mouthpiece shank is not making proper contact with the receiver. So it should be flush up against the receiver, not only against part of the shank. So if the mouthpiece is able to rock around, it's not making great contact. And that can reduce the amount of energy that can be transferred from the mouthpiece into the horn. And the vast majority of people watching this stream, if you live in the United States, if you live in North America, you probably have a horn that is Morse taper. Yes, that includes all of you who are playing German-made horns. European taper really only applies to a few instruments. Really, instruments made by Alexander, instruments patterned after Alexander, and a lot of Asian-made instruments because they're also patterned after Alexander. And especially like the Rico Kuhns of the world, the Dirks, all that, instruments that are imported into the United States will tend to have Morse receivers. Like we work with Stammvi, and all of the horn Stammvi sells in Europe are European taper. And when they started importing horns to us, they imported horns with European taper. But as you know, an American dealer, as soon as they did that, we asked for all the subsequent batches of horns to be made with Morse tapers. So yes, you know, that's the reason why most horns that are imported here are imported with Morse taper receivers, since that's the mouthpiece that's usually used. And if a importer does import something with a European taper, a shop like ours will ask them not to do that. And hey, could you make this change so that it fits Morse taper mouthpieces? But once you've determined if your horn is Morse or European, what happens if you feel like your mouthpiece is still fitting in too far? Number one, ask yourself, is it making a difference in the playing? A mouthpiece that's a problem, so a mouthpiece that's fitting in too far problematically, will have a low register that is, unfocused, and the high register will, the high register will be unfocused, and the low register will be woofy. So if you normally play, so if on other mouthpieces or other horns, you have a nice focused high register and a solid low register, but you put this mouthpiece into this horn and you find, oh, the high register is really, really unfocused and the low register is really, really tubby and loose. That's an indication that the mouthpiece might be fitting too far in. You want to be really careful about trying to make that determination visually, by visually looking at where the mouthpiece fits. And that's because the end of the mouthpiece should preferably hit the venturi of the venturi of the lead pipe. What's the venturi of the lead pipe? I should have made a drawing of this now that I think about it, but basically you can imagine the mouthpiece tapers down into the lead pipe. But at some point in the lead pipe, the taper needs to start going out again, because the smallest part of your horn is right here, and then it just continues to expand on through the lead pipe. So the point where the taper in, the receiver part to fit the mouthpiece, meets the part that it starts tapering out, that is the venturi. But here's the thing, the venturi can be in radically different places on different horns. And it's something you can measure, but it's not something you can visually see. So don't be concerned if your mouthpiece, if you get a new horn or you get a new mouthpiece, and your mouthpiece fits farther in than you're used to seeing. That could really just be where the venturi of that particular horn is. The best way to tell whether your mouthpiece is fitting properly or not is by playing it. If your mouthpiece is fitting too far out, the high register will be tight and the low register will be constricted. And if your mouthpiece is fitting too far in, the high register is going to be unfocused and the low register is going to be tubby. So that is the generally what mouthpiece fit is and what the difference between Morse and European taper. Now I have a question here, which I'm specifically going to get to because Engelbert Schmid. So the question is Engelbert Schmid a Morse taper? And Engelbert Schmid, along with Yamaha, is a special case. which is why I've actually brought along an Engelbert Schmid with me. Once I find it, yes. Engelbert Schmid horns have what's called a combo taper. So they take Morse taper mouthpieces, and they also take European taper mouthpieces. I find that the combo taper, basically, it's a bit of a compromise because both Morse and European mouthpieces rock a little bit in Engelbert Schmid and Yamaha receivers. Not much, not very much, but they rock a little bit, which means that the shank is not making full contact with the walls of the receiver. But if you're using Engelbert Schmid or you're using Yamaha, they will tend to have combo taper receivers. And again, yeah, funny. And the next question that came up is, what about Yamaha horns? Mine seems to be similar to a European taper. But yeah, Yamaha horns, at least modern Yamaha horns, come with combo taper. But you'll notice even in this combo receiver, you'll notice that the European taper mouthpiece does come out a little farther than the Morse taper mouthpiece. And that's due to another thing that no one really mentions when they're talking about Morse versus European taper mouthpieces. And that's the fact that European taper mouthpieces also tend to be bigger. And that has nothing to do with the taper itself. The receivers are just wider in Alexander horns and other horns that are patterned after Alexander. And thus the mouthpiece shanks are just physically bigger. I'll tell you a story. When we first started making these Houghton mouthpieces, we were working with Dave Hauser on the design, and we had Morse and European taper shanks made. But we found out very quickly that our European taper mouthpieces didn't work very well in Alexander horns, even though it was a true European taper. But the thing is that those European taper mouthpieces were still fitting too far in to the horn. And that's because we hadn't taken into account or realized that, hey, generally the mouthpieces that come as default European taper, like Joseph Clear and Alexander Brand mouthpieces, also just straight up have bigger shanks. So after that first batch of mouthpieces, people who buy European taper Houghton mouthpieces will notice that it says Euro +2. And that +2 means that the shank is larger and thus backs out the mouthpiece 2 more millimeters versus what would just be a standard European taper mouthpiece. So it's not the taper, it's the size of the mouthpiece that causes this to stick out farther than the Morse taper mouthpiece. I do want to say one more comment to Frederico's comment about my horn seems to be close to a European taper. I said this before and I'll say it again. You should determine if it is Morse or European taper by placing the mouthpiece into the receiver. Notice I'm not tightening it in. I'm just dropping it into the receiver and I'm seeing how much it rocks. If I put it in and the mouthpiece rocks a lot, then it is, probably either, if you put a European taper mouthpiece in and it rocks a lot, the receiver is probably Morse. If you put a Morse taper mouthpiece in and it rocks a lot, the receiver is probably European. Or you just have a really worn receiver, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. On a side note, I was doing this on the Engelbert Schmid horn, which has a combo taper. And while the Morse taper mouthpiece rocks far less than it would if you put a Morse taper mouthpiece into a European receiver, I'm noticing that the European taper mouthpiece does rock a little less than the Morse taper mouthpiece in this Engelbert Schmidt. Do with that information as you will. It's still officially a combo taper. So there, on some horns, you also get some other neat tricks that you can do. So this is, oh great, I do have change in my pocket. Or I do not. Let's see, can I do it with this? Nope. Yes, I can. Okay. Some horns. So in our shop, all of the new horns, you know, the LDX from Lewis and Dirk, so the LDX5, all of the horns by Dieter Otto, and all of the horns made by Johannes Finke have interchangeable receivers. And on Dirk horns, there are actually these little notches here that you can put a coin, or in this case, the end of a key in, turn, and then the receiver actually comes out. So again, in our shop, this is a feature that Dirk horns have, Finke horns, and Otto horns. And thus, this is a Morse taper bit. This horn also comes with a European taper bit, so you can just change the receiver itself to change between Morse and European taper. There are also some other unadvertised benefits to this. Like, for example, if you're just convinced that your mouthpiece is fitting too far out, you can take your receiver to a shop like ours, and we can actually modify the receiver so it fits a little further in. Well, technically, we can modify any receiver, but if you modify this receiver, you can always buy a new bit if you have regret later. Another way to play around with mouthpiece fit is to, you know, so if you're like, well, I really think my mouthpiece is fitting too far into my receiver. Like, you know, I feel like things are just unfocused. What you do is you can just take the tiniest piece of invisible tape, put it on the side of the mouthpiece, and then put the mouthpiece into the receiver of the horn. And you'll be surprised by how much you can back it out. But it's got to be a little piece. Don't wrap the receiver in tape. Just a tiny piece of tape on the side of the mouthpiece. And you can play around with the depth of the mouthpiece by doing that. Other than that, oh, and I do have a horn with a true European receiver here. This is a Dirk D3, which, yes, is a very similar wrap to an Alexander 103. So again, a German horn made to be played by Germans, which means it is a European taper. So if I put my Morse taper mouthpiece in here, you can see it rocks around a lot. That mouthpiece is not making good contact with the receiver at all. Now again, I can jam it in there, and now it's not moving anymore, but it's still not making good contact with the walls of the receiver. But if I put the European mouthpiece down in here, no movement. So we'll take Morse taper mouthpiece here, and we'll see. There we go. If you can hear a difference between the wrong mouthpiece and the right mouthpiece. And I will warn you, I don't normally play this style of horn. I know many of you out there are very big Alexander or Alexander type horn fans. I'm not. And there's nothing wrong with the horn or this style of horn, but it's not the tradition I was brought up with, and it's not really the sound or feel that I go for. So just keep that in mind. So that was a Morse tapered mouthpiece and a European receiver. Now we're going to go with a European mouthpiece in European receiver. Both the same model mouthpiece, by the way. The cup is a Howden H4. The one is brass and one is stainless, but that will make virtually no difference in sound. So I can tell you, I'm not sure if any sort of sound difference came across, but as I was playing, there was a big difference in the feel of the horn. The horn felt much easier to play with the European tapered mouthpiece. The notes slotted better. Things were much farther in control. So all of this to say, and I guess the entire reason I did this stream is that yes, the mouthpiece fit matters. Yes, the taper of mouthpiece, whether you're using Morse or European taper mouthpiece, matters, but in different ways than you might think. So if you could take away anything, it would be that you can't figure out the proper mouthpiece fit by just visually looking at how the mouthpiece fits from the outside. You have to do so. You have to do so by playing. And that 99% of the people, well, maybe, I mean, I know there are several Europeans who like to watch these streams. 90% of you, and virtually all of you in North America, are using horns with a Morse tapered receiver. So let me see if there are any other questions. Again, I know this was not, I felt like this was an important topic to address, but not the most exciting one in the world. And I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be doing a live stream again next week. I can give you a preview. It's going to be about this little device, of which we just started selling in the shop, and spoiler alert, I think it's quite amazing. So we'll be talking about it and some other practice tools that I like next week. All right, thank you all very much for tuning in, and I will see you later.